Welcome back to the Word on Fire show. I'm your host, Jared Zimmer, the Director of Outreach and Mission here at Word on Fire. And as always, a warm welcome to Bishop Robert Barron. Bishop, it's good to be with you again.
Hey, Jared. Always good to hear your voice. I can see you. We're doing Skype here, so I can see you too on the screen. So
yeah, it's amazing, the modern technology.
And all your kids are doing well?
They're doing well. Yep, still growing like weeds, and the boys are doing well, and little Anastasia's growing like a weed, so it's good.
Little Anastasia, who's what, about... She's not 6 months yet.
Not yet. No, she turns 5 months here soon. So, yeah. So listen, I know you've been doing a lot of traveling here lately, and actually two of the recent ones are you were able to go to Philadelphia and Denver for 2 lectures. Maybe you can fill us in on the topics and what all you spoke about.
Yeah, they both were good, though I had a difficult time getting to Denver, but that's just because of, the airlines. But I went to Philly and I gave the Cardinal Foley lecture, named for the famous Cardinal John Foley, who for many years was director of communications at the Vatican. And I talked really about Word on Fire there. So a lot of things we've been talking about, you and I, how it developed. And I sort of culled lessons from the Word on Fire story. And it was really designed for the seminarians there who might be interested in doing this kind of work. And then in Denver, I gave a more reflective sort of talk. It was on relativism. So the Archbishop there, Archbishop Aquila, asked me to speak on that topic. And I went into some of the genealogy of relativism, where it comes from intellectually, and then why it's a danger, and then how we can engage it. So that was to a very enthusiastic crowd at a big parish outside of Denver. And both those were, what do they call it? Live stream, where they were broadcast simultaneously. So that was a good thing.
Yeah, if anyone wants to watch the recordings, they can actually go to Bishop Robert Barron's Facebook page, and they're on there to watch the full lectures. So I'm sure people will definitely want to go there and enjoy that. Well, for today's episode, we're going to discuss something that really is an intrinsic aspect of evangelization. Sort of gearing off of our previous conversations regarding the ethos and foundations of the Word on Fire movement. And really the aspect we're going to talk about today is community. Not only the intrinsic need of man to have community, which is certainly something that the church teaches, but also the need to have a certain kind of community within the Christian life. And today, Bishop Barron and I are going to discuss a few of the problems we face in a sort of postmodern autonomous culture, the reason mankind really needs community, and really a few ways in which we can create the sort of communities where the purpose is building one another for the mission of the church. So Bishop, maybe to start, I've seen study after study stating that modern man is lonely, which is interesting in the wake of, the social media boom, that we're more connected than ever, yet people are feeling less and less connected to one another. What are some of the reasons we've experienced this problem?
Oh gosh, it's a huge question, Jared, and the roots of that are very old and very tangled. But go back to the very beginnings of modernity, and I'd look at 2 figures, one Martin Luther, the other René Descartes. And, the 2 great inventors of modernity had their breakthrough experience in a sort of lonely setting. What I mean is Luther on his own, in the privacy of the monastery, having what they call the tower experience, when he had that sense of being justified by grace through faith. Now, it wasn't so much in dialogue with the wider community of his monastery or the church, but it was on his own. Then think of Descartes, at a more secular level. The founder of modern philosophy goes into he says, heated room in the little German town of Ulm, all by himself. And he doubts all that can be doubted until he discovers what can't be doubted, the famous cogito ergo sum, right? I think, therefore I am. That both of these figures commence their work in this very lonely way, you might say, in the privacy of their interiority. And both put a huge stress, therefore, on autonomy, right? And I think that does trickle down into the whole of modernity. Those 2 figures impacted profoundly the way we think about the self. And I'm going to oversimplify here a bit, but Catholicism has always put a huge premium on the community, on the mystical body of Jesus, that we're in this together. As Henri de Lubac argues in his famous book, Catholicism, that every doctrine of the church has a social quality, even salvation. It's not so much I'm going to be saved, but that we're going to be saved. So I think there's always been something of a tension between the way moderns think about the self and the way Catholicism thinks about the self. And that, I think, is one of the great themes, actually, in a lot of contemporary theologizing.
And to kind of build off of Descartes, much of the other Enlightenment thinkers, such as, Immanuel Kant in particular, were proponents of this sort of rationally autonomous self. And you see sort of this reaction to those philosophies where on one end you have indeed the autonomous self standing above, everyone else, getting to, whatever he needs, he will do what he has to do to get there. You see that in Ayn Rand and many of the others. But then on the other side, you have the philosophy of communism, where you come together and it's not about the self. It's purely about the community. So how do we find sort of that good balance between those two extremes?
No, that's a good point. And actually, when I used to teach political philosophy back in the seminary, I would present Marx precisely as a reaction to this hyper stress on the autonomy of the individual. I saw him as a reaction to the Cartesian Kantian strain within modernity. Now, overreacted, and all kinds of other negative things came into Marx. But in a way, it was, I think, a reaction to an excessive individualism. I might rely here on the thought of Paul Tillich to answer your question, the Protestant theologian. He said that in between autonomy and heteronomy is theonomy. Now, what he meant was autonomy. That's the Cartesian Kantian self, right? I'm in charge, autonomos. I'm my own law. The other extreme, heteronomy, heteros nomos. There's another law, a law outside myself, right? And that's the state, or it's the government, or it's the society. Think now of all of the forms, of rebellion against that in favor of the autonomous self. Okay. We can oscillate between these two extremes. But Tillich said the resolution is theonomy, which is that God becomes the law of my life. Now, see, God is not identical to the self. It's not autonomy. But also, it's not simply heteronomy, because God is not simply an other, Instead, God is closer to me than I am to myself, as Augustine knew, right? God is in all things by essence, presence, and power, as Thomas Aquinas said. And therefore, in obeying God, I'm not so much surrendering my autonomy, but I'm finding a more authentic autonomy, if that makes sense. So I think that's the answer to the question, is it's theonomy rather than autonomy or heteronomy.
Yeah, and as I mentioned before, we're in a time period where the social media boom has just been incredible. I mean, for people to connect one another, on different sides of the planet in an instant. But at the same time, sociologists are saying that there's actually a health crisis of loneliness, and still others are saying that the lack of community is part of the reason for the rise in PTSD among soldiers coming home from war. So do you think social media has become an action for the good of the community, or possibly lead towards also the disconnected?
It's both and I've thought a lot about this and read a lot about it. And I think I would say emphatically both and, which I know is not a real satisfying answer. But I want to stress the positive side of it, which I think is real, that the social media, as the name itself suggests, social media, that it does connect us to each other and to people that, let's face it, otherwise we'd have no contact with. I think of all the folks that I interact with every day through social media. Now, I grant you, in a somewhat superficial and less than perfect and all those things, I grant that. Nevertheless, there's a real outreach, a real connectivity. And I think we shouldn't badmouth that. To me, there's something Catholic about the social media that way. And even, I've used it to illustrate the mystical body. Isn't it weird? Like, Jared, right now you're in Fort Worth, Texas. I'm in Los Angeles, California. We're talking to people who are all over the world, right? Well, we're connecting. We're like cells and molecules in this mystical body. Is our communion perfect and wonderful in every way? And of course not. It's somewhat disembodied. I'm looking at an image of you right now. You're looking at an image of me. But okay, let's not hyper stress the negativity. So I'm good with it. I think it's worthwhile. Just recently, where was it now? I was in a dialogue, and the person suggested that it's just been bad for us. That I just don't see anything good about com boxes and Facebook pages and all this stuff. And I said no. I get all the negativity, but I'm going to say no. There's something positive about it, and it's worth using. Now, the negative side, as you suggest, quite rightly, a superficiality in this connectivity, maybe a sort of illusion of connection in some way, So all my friends and followers on Facebook, but how many are really friends? And I just saw something recently that was a bit nostalgic for people more like my age, and it was a photo of a bunch of kids all on their bikes, outside playing. And the comment was something like, we had real friends, not Facebook friends or followers, And I get that. I do, because I have those vivid memories too of, a very real communion. So anyway, I would see it as a step. It's a step. And what we're trying to lead people to ultimately is the face-to-face communion in the mystical body. But I'm not down on the social media. I think we're okay.
Yeah, and it's interesting how I love whenever we see something socially, and then you see what the church teaches, and once again, the church is right. So the church teaches that the human person needs community. In fact, the Catechism states that the love of God is inseparable from the love of neighbor. So really, at the human level, why is it that we need each other?
We're built that way. I mean, go back even to Plato. Go back to some of the ancient myths that understood that. They envisioned originally we were a unity, and then we were cut apart, and so all of your life is kind of looking for your complement in Plato's myth. I think anyone who's married kind of understands that when you find your partner in marriage, you found like another self. You found what completes you, right? And I would say, in a fully Christian sense, we're made in the image and likeness of God, and God is himself a communio of persons. And so connectivity is built into us. Watch a little baby. I was baptizing John and Emily Carney's baby yesterday. It's a little newborn. They're reaching out all the time. They're seeking connection through their eyes and their hands and their bodies, and reaching out. And if you really press that, it's grounded in the Trinitarian dynamics of the Father giving rise to the Son returning in love to the Father, the Spirit is the mutual love of Father and Son. If that's who God is, then everything in the universe reflects that. And that's where I find some of the stuff in the high-level physics so interesting, where they find all these different dimensions of connectivity. The way being just tends to want to reach out, for its complement. So that can't be denied. That's why loneliness is opposed to God's purposes. It's not good for the man to be alone. We hear in the Bible, and that's true whether you're talking about celibacy as well. I mean, I'm not married, but it's also true to say it's not good for me to be alone. So a lot of my life has to take on a marriage-like quality, which is why I'm wearing this ring, by the way, as a bishop, it's a wedding ring, is I'm married to the people of this archdiocese. So, I mean, all of that is built into us. We're hardwired for it because we come from the Trinity.
Yeah, and one place in particular that this lack of community has been felt is in many parishes. Several parishes around the country kind of remunerate about how difficult it is to build a solid community life around to create a social structure for people. In the past there was a sense of sort of maybe an ethnic connection where you had a Polish church for the Polish, or Irish for the Irish, or Hispanic for the Hispanic, which there's kind of positive and negative aspects to that. But today, that certainly no longer exists. So what might you say are a few ways that you've seen cause this problem, but then also ways that the communal life blooms in parishes?
Yeah, it's a good question, Jared. And a lot of people have wrestled with that over the years. I think a lot of it is what you're saying is that the cultural supports have been kicked out. So go back many, many years, like to my parents' time, when parishes kind of grew up organically out of these neighborhoods. And the neighborhoods had a very strong sense of connectivity. Even the simple fact that a lot of people many years ago would sit out on their front porch and the kids would play on the sidewalk together. They were linked just by that very fact. The parish that grew up organically out of these neighborhoods became a focal point, the school and so on. That's where people would gather. There's all kinds of cultural reasons why a lot of that neighborhood connectivity has been lost. Many have said air conditioning had a lot to do with it. Because back in the day, you wanted to get cool in the summertime, you had to go outside. You had to sit in your front porch. Now we're all kind of locked in behind our closed windows and doors. The TV set, many have argued had a lot to do with it. People now go inside for their entertainment, maybe in their own room or with their own family. Years ago, it was outside. So there's all of that. There's the kind of cultural issue. I wonder too with parishes, Catholic parishes, part of the problem is that we're too big. Think of a smaller Protestant church that has maybe a few hundred regular congregants, that they might come to know each other quite well in church. Where in a Catholic parish where you've got 6 or 7 masses on a weekend, you've got thousands and thousands of people coming through. They often will say, "Yeah, I go to mass and I see people around me, but I don't feel a connection to them." So those are a couple quick observations. I think parishes have got to be hyper focused on this issue and community building, inviting people, maybe getting them in small groups. I'm an advocate of the Catholic Action model, which was get the physicians and nurses in your parish together, get the engineers and scientists in your parish together for a structured conversation. Get those who are raising small kids together for a conversation. Get people of like mind and like interest, and then bring them through a process of see, judge, and act, right? What do they see in their life? How do they judge it in light of the gospel? And therefore, how should they act? I like that model. It largely has fallen away since the council, but I think that could be a good way to build up community.
Yeah, I think you hit it right on the head as far as starting with a cultural interest. So whether it's their career or whether it's, these other things, it connects that sort of outside the parish life to the parish, right? I think that's one of the disconnections that I've seen. But one thing we've discussed several times here on the podcast is our desire to see a Word on Fire movement. And of course, with many successful movements, there has to be a communal life involved. So what role do you see in the potential communal life within the movement?
Yeah, well, I think we start, because we're an internet reality largely. I think we start with that. I think there's a really cool community that we have, the core group at Word on Fire, and that family model I think is an important one. But I think we're going to start with the internet. So if we get people to join the movement and they get access to these specialized materials and so on, then I see Jared, like part of your role is to gather them maybe first in a virtual way, like through the internet. All those in Texas, all those in the Southeast, all those in New England, who are using it. But then eventually, I'd love to see us organize conferences. Have all the people from Texas who are using Word on Fire materials. Let's get them together in some setting, and we'll have talks and liturgies and opportunity to discuss. Then gather as many as we can in the New England area, et cetera. So I see it as building up maybe from less intense to more intense over time, beginning with the internet, what that can give us, which is a real, though mitigated form of community, and then to keep pressing it so we get more and more intense.
And once we have sort of this community model, say, it gets really big in Texas and we have enough people just in Fort Worth alone where we can actually call them maybe a Word on Fire community, what would you like to see these communities do?
I'd like to see them encourage each other, strengthen each other in a lifestyle of evangelization. If you were to say our unique charism is that we're going to live our day-to-day lives as though evangelization is the central dynamic. And that's a very important thing is when you wake up in the morning, what is the central dynamic of your life, of your day? What's your day going to be about? And you could say it's about my family, or let's say you're in school. It's about getting this degree that I've set out to get. That's good. But what if you were to say the ultimate goal of my day is to announce Jesus Christ to somebody. How will that shape my decisions? How will that shape where I go, what I do, what I choose to read and think about, how I speak, whom I choose to associate with? If evangelization is the central organizing focus, your life will change. And I would see these communities as encouraging each other in that reorganization.
And maybe we have a listener who's thinking, sure, I'd love to be a part of a community, but really I have no idea where to start right now. Maybe they're shy or can't seem to find a place where they feel comfortable. Maybe what advice would you offer for that person?
Well, at the risk of sounding self-serving here, I would say join the Word on Fire movement. I think that's what we're offering to someone precisely in that situation, Jared, that maybe they say, look, I'm not ready to get up in a pulpit. I'm not ready to get up on the street corner and evangelize. But I wouldn't mind joining a community online where we get access to good material. We could reach out to each other. We could ask and answer questions together in a way that's pretty non-threatening, that you could do it first, from the privacy of your own house or your own room. So I'd say that. Maybe join this online community and then see where it goes, see where it's going to lead you. Because ultimately, it is leading to that face-to-face encounter. Jesus and the woman at the well, or Jesus and Zacchaeus, are the great models of sort of face-to-face evangelization. But there's a way, I think, to move into that space more gradually. That's what we've got in mind.
All right, and now it's time for our listener question. Remember, if you have a question for Bishop Barron, be sure to go to askbishopbarron.com and record your question from any device, and perhaps you'll be featured on one of our upcoming episodes. Today's question comes from Jacob from St. Louis, who asked a question regarding the individual conscience.
Hello, Bishop Barron. This is Jacob from St. Louis. I was wondering if you could clarify between authentic conscience and what C.S. Lewis calls the poison of subjectivism. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a good question, Jacob. It's a good searching one. I rely on John Henry Newman. He's my touchstone when it comes to conscience. And Newman refers to conscience as the aboriginal vicar of Christ in the soul. I don't know any higher characterization of conscience than that. That's why, famously he said, I would certainly drink a toast to the Pope, but if you please, to conscience first and then to the Pope. And he was making that same point, that the aboriginal, the fundamental vicar of Christ in the soul is the conscience. So that's very, very high praise. Now, at the same time, Newman insisted that the conscience is not an excuse for, autonomous self-definition. Newman knew all about this modern turn that we were talking about earlier. He knew all about the Cartesian Kantian move. He did not see it as some sort of warrant for a self-inventing autonomy. Remember, aboriginal vicar of Christ in the soul. It's not the autonomous. It's theonomy, if you want. It's Christ reigning within me. It's like when Paul said, it's no longer I who live, it's Christ who lives in me. So it's not the autonomous Paul. It's Christ living in me. Now, a way to express this then is to say it's the informed conscience. It's the conscience that has been now conformed to Christ. That is the aboriginal vicar of Christ in the soul. That's the conscience that I listen to above all. And so it certainly wouldn't mean for Newman, and I certainly wouldn't argue that it's some sort of warrant for self-invention, or Lewis's, what did he say, poisonous self, I forget how you put it there, but it's not that. It's something like theonomy, I think is what Newman means by calling the conscience the aboriginal vicar of Christ in the soul.
All right. Well, thanks so much for tuning in to the Word on Fire show. And I wanted to alert our listeners of an upcoming Word on Fire event on August 20th to the 22nd of this year. We're going to be hosting the Word on Fire National Conference for Priests. If you go to wordonfire.org/priest, It'll have all of the information there and the ability for priests to go on and register. You see, priests will spend a few days with Bishop Barron discussing the important art and craft of preaching. Now, there are just a few spots left, so if you know a priest or if you are a priest, be sure to go once again to wordonfire.org/priest, and we'd love to see you there. So be sure to check out our website, wordonfireshow.com, for several links regarding the topic we discussed today. And God bless all of you, and we'll see you back here next week on the Word on Fire Show.